Windows and Linux comparison. There are three types of users in Linux. There are regular, administrative, root, and service users. Whereas in Windows, there are three types of users accounts. There are administrator, standard, and guest. According to the market research data, on 92.63% of the world's PCs, Windows is running, while hardly 1% of PC users use Linux. Linux uses the monolithic kernel which consumes more running space, whereas Windows uses the microkernel which takes less space but lowers the system running efficiency than Linux. In Microsoft Windows, files are stored in directories folder on different data drives like CTE. But in Linux, files are ordered in a tree structure starting with the root directory, further branched out to various other subdirectories. In Linux, everything is treated like a file. Directories are files, files are files, and externally connected devices such as printer, mouse, keyboard are also files. When it comes to security, every Windows user has faced security and stability issues at some point in time. Since Windows is an extensively used OS, hackers, spammers target Windows frequently. Windows consumers versions were originally designed for ease of use on a single user PC without a network connection and did not have security features built in. Many a time, users of Windows OS face the blue screen of death. This is because due to the failure of the system to respond, eventually, the user has to keep aside his or her frustration and manually restart the PC. On the other hand, Linux is based on a multi-user architecture, making it way more stable than a single-user OS like Windows. As Linux is community-driven with regular monitoring by the developers from every corner of the earth, any new problem raised can be solved within a few hours and the necessary patch can be ready for supply. Windows shoots, Windows scores. When it comes to compatibility, users of Windows can be certain that almost any software, even the most obscure, outdated software, will work. Even when it is abandoned by developers, Windows has great legacy support, plain and simple. Linux, on the other hand, has been struggling with basics that Windows users take for granted. When it comes to privacy, if you are a Linux user, you have an operating system that doesn't spy on you. Having Linux means the system is yours and yours alone. You can also add to the mix that most Linux systems come with an option of built-in military-grade encryption. As a user, you can be sure that device thieves poses no real problem to your data. On the contrary, Windows can watch what users do, offering to sync to the Microsoft OneDrive service or to learn behavior to make Cortana, the Microsoft personal assistant, better. To be honest, I do not favor these tools as they're pretty intrusive. Though, some users like these features, just my subjective opinion. The source code, Linux is an open source operating system whereas Windows OS is a commercial. Linux has access to source code and alters the code as per user need, whereas Windows does not have access to the source code. In Linux, the user has access to the source code of the kernel and alter the code according to his need. It has its own advantages. Bugs in the OS will get fixed at a rapid pace, but developers may take advantage of any weakness of an OS if found. In Windows, only selected members to have access to the source code. When it comes to reliability, Windows as well have to come to know becomes sluggish by the day. You have to reinstall Windows after a while when you encounter crashes or slowdowns on your system. If you are a Linux user, you will not have to reinstall it just to experience a faster and a smoother system. Linux helps your system run smoothly for a longer period, much longer in fact. Also, as a Windows user, you will have to develop a habit where you keep on rebooting the system for just about everything. Just install software, reboot. Uninstall software, reboot. Got a Windows update, reboot. System seems to slow down. You guessed it right, reboot. However, in case of Linux, you can comfortably continue with your work and OS will not bother you. This is probably why you could observe that most of the internet giants like Facebook and Google run in Linux. Even supercomputers run mostly in Linux. When it comes to multimedia, both Linux and Windows OS are pretty rich in multimedia applications. A key advantage of Linux is that most of the multimedia applications are freely available. In the case of Windows, users may have to pay a hefty price to get the software, although many open source or free versions are often available. When it comes to gaming, if you are a gamer, need 100% compatibility with a particular software or want a user-friendly system. Hands down, Windows win. Stream for Linux now allows you to install Windows games, but it is still in beta, and not all Windows games will work. It can be frustrating for Linux users, and no doubt the situation will change in the future. The graphics cards vendors also trained to support Windows platforms rather than Linux. In the open source, if you are an advocate of open source software or just plain tired of all the forced update and reboot in Windows, then Linux may be a viable option.